Welcome to Behind the Page, the Eli Marks podcast, with your hosts, John Gaspard and me, Jim Cunningham.
Hey there, Jim.
John, how are you?
I'm good. I'm very good. I'm so delighted to see you, and we were doing some pre-show chat. I forgot to open up my notes for this particular episode, which my notes now remind me is episode 415 of the Eli Marks podcast, which is what I call it, although the official name is Behind the Page, the Eli Marks podcast. But when I tell people you want to look for the podcast, just type in Eli Marks podcast and you'll find it.
Let the permanent record show that maybe for the first time in the 4 seasons of this podcast, I was completely prepared and you had to open something, which it's not a competition.
It isn't, but if you want to mark the decline, this is where it starts, right here. Anyway, season 4, episode 15. We're reading The Miser's Dream, and I think I mentioned last time that I'm surprised it took us this long to get Joe Diamond on the podcast. He's a very busy guy, but we're busy guys. I mean, come on. Anyway, we're 4 seasons in and we finally got Joe. I met him via David Parr when you invited David Parr to Minneapolis for Sunday Night Magic. I didn't know either one of them, and they came here not once but twice. They drove here twice for Sunday Night Magic.
Good people that they are.
Good people that they are, and was able to find some decent vegan pizza for David, which he was really delighted by, and got to spend some time with both of them, and then have been corresponding on and off with Joe for quite a while. He's one of the 2 beta readers on early drafts of Eli Marks' books.
I did not know that.
Yes, he points out things that might be right or wrong. The other one is Scott Wells, who runs the Magic Word podcast. They've both been very good about doing that. And I haven't done anything special for Scott yet, but for Joe, the character of the aging comedian in the book The Zombie Ball is named Joey D, and it's in reference to Joe Diamond.
These things are just so fascinating to me because while I think I am an intimate of yours and certainly knowledgeable about the series, there's always a little Easter egg for Jimmy. Things just pop up out of nowhere that I go, I didn't know that, and I read that book cover to cover into a microphone, had no idea. So.
Yeah, the other, not that we're doing that this season, but the other Easter egg about the zombie ball is that the events in the story take place over about an 8-hour period. And the book itself is, I believe, a little over 6 hours when you read it, but it is the only essentially real-time Eli Marks mystery, where it starts when he gets a phone call to go and do an event that night, and it ends when the event ends. So maybe 10 hours, 8 to 10 hours. But the idea came from you narrating these audiobooks, and I would look at them and go, that's, most of these books run about 8 hours. It'd be kind of fun to try to write one that took place in 8 hours. And I will tell you right now, writing a mystery that takes place in real time is real hard.
Not much fun, as it turns out.
It was fun in that I was able to do a lot of sending up of the things I'd run into in 30 years of producing meetings and events, and the types of personalities you run into there. And also was able to pay tribute to one of my favorite technical directors, Walter, who shows up in the book as a technical director. And I don't know if to this day if he knows that he is sort of the hero of that book.
He's just finding out now, probably.
I don't know if Walter listens to this.
Well, he should. He's in one of the books.
He is in one of the books. Yes, that's true. Anyway, what we're here to do today is first talk to Joe Diamond, and then we'll dig further into The Miser's Dream. One of the things that I was reminded of in talking to Joe was how much he reminds me of a young Kreskin, because he is very much a mentalist, and he is very much a great self-promoter, and I don't mean that in any negative way. He is very good at promoting the brand of Joe Diamond as a mind reader.
America's favorite mind reader.
Exactly. And to prove that point, he offered to perform an interactive magic trick, a mental trick with cards, at the end of our interview. So as we kicked off our conversation with him, he explained to us and to listeners what they would need in order to take part in this trick. Before we get started with our questions, of which we have a multitude, I understand you're going to do a little something for us at the end of this interview. And tell us what our listeners need to have by then in order to partake from their homes.
Yes, you will. We are going to do a magic ritual to awaken the magician in all of us. You'll just need 10 cards. They can be playing cards, tarot cards, Uno cards, cards against humanity. They could even be index cards or business cards. If you're going to go that route, you'll need a pen or pencil as well to make a mark on one of them, but have those ready by the end of the episode.
I'm in. I'm completely in.
Joe, what's your magic origin story?
There's the story that, yes, overlaps with every other magician. I got a kit. I was right in the midst of that magic 90s boom of the world's greatest magic specials and the David Copperfield. My first Copperfield special was the 15 Years of Magic special, which was like his greatest hits. So I saw it all. I saw him go over Niagara Falls. I saw him make the Statue of Liberty disappear, walk through the Great Wall of China, and that special finished with flying. So it was all like the best stuff. That was like my first magic special. I had it on a tape, watched it with my cousins, and I like sequestered it away and watched it on repeat over and over and over again. That's very much the overlap of pretty much, everyone else. The areas where I differ, though, is I was into a lot of strange and unusual stuff as a kid. So the other side effect of being an early to mid 90s kid and only child was Nick at Night. I watched Twilight Zone. I watched Alfred Hitchcock Presents. On AMC each year, I watched the 13 Nights of Halloween and watched all the Universal monster movies. I watched Psycho. I watched North by Northwest. I loved murder mysteries. By age like 5 to 10 is in this area of when I'm watching all this stuff.
Holy mackerel.
But in that range, like, you don't understand that you're watching old TV. You just know that after 8 o'clock, Nickelodeon becomes Nick at Night, and now you're watching the spookier Twilight Zone show. So I was into that weird stuff. I was at the end, I was into Ghostbusters, which sounds like, oh yeah, a lot of kids were into Ghostbusters. But again, this was the mid 90s, a good decade after the fact. I was at the end of all that. I was always into like stuff, I was into ghosts, time travel, UFOs, crop circles. And at the time, I didn't process this then, of course, but looking back on it, I kind of saw magic as my way to make all that stuff in those Twilight Zone episodes, those spooky movies, those Alfred Hitchcock stories. That was my way to kind of make that stuff real and put people through, because I didn't have a camera. I didn't know how to sit down and write a story with a twist ending, but I knew from the book how to have someone write down the name of their card on a piece of paper. We'd burn it, and I'd rub the ashes on my arm, and the writing would mysteriously appear on my arm when I was like 14, 15. And at the time, like, I didn't realize at the time, but the fact that we were doing this at night at my friend's house, down by the water, and all that extra atmosphere, just added to it. And again, I don't think none of that was conscious. It just kind of was the foundation of it all. And it just became the more I became conscious of it, the more I kind of sat down, was like, okay, this is the Twilight Zone episode. People are coming to, so I used to do a show in a house that was an art park for many years. There were painters, photographers, and I had a show on the second floor that sat 13 people. Everyone was like, "Ooh, why 13 people?" Well, that's only how many people fit in there. But it was a good story. And I was like, okay, people are coming to this historic house. It's reportedly haunted, to see a mind reader. What's going to happen? Like, if this is what Twilight Zone episode, what would happen? It would start off charming, and as it went along, it would get a little maybe, darker. I can't go full evil by the end, but like maybe it can get darker, and it's like, oh wow, that was crazy at the end. That kind of got out of hand, didn't it? And using that as a model, and even for the most cliche venue possible, doing a corporate mentalism gig. Okay, a corporation has hired a guy to come in to read our minds. What's that going to look like? And that could be a pretty interesting show, or that could be a pretty interesting story from that standpoint. So that's kind of been my my guiding light, my kind of like you said, origin story and kind of groundwork leading forward that I try to use in all my work.
So, Joe, when did you then sort of turn and start focusing on specifically mentalism or mental magic?
I'm going to invoke the great wise one, Juan Tamariz here, because I was just rereading his amazing book, The Magic Rainbow, which is like as thick as my head. And when he gets to mentalism in that book, he says something fascinating because, my whole life, people have always said, the differences between magic and mentalism and the differences between mentalism and mental magic. And Tamariz says something amazing in there, which he says, well, all magic is mentalism because all magic takes place in the mind of the spectator. And with any kind of presentation, it could take on the feeling of mentalism. And he said he truly believes he says he truly thinks any effect with the right presentation and right atmosphere could take on that route. I never, it wasn't a conscious choice. Like even when I was 13, I was having people pick cards and just staring at them and telling them what card they were thinking of. Again, that was right at that point, the end of the 90s was when David Blaine hit. So the idea of doing a magic trick and then telling someone the card they were thinking of or the word they were thinking of out of a book wasn't that. The most popular magician on TV was doing that. So it wasn't super out of that realm to be doing that. Like it was never a conscious choice of, okay, this is going to be a mentalism effect followed by a bizarre effect, followed by this. Again, I had the idea in my mind of like, okay, I want magic. I want that mystery. I want my show to have that feeling of, that otherworldliness, that kind of weird, kind of guttural response while still feeling safe, again, like that, Alfred Hitchcock Presents Twilight Zone feeling. And mentalism, for the most part, does that or lends itself to that more than most other magic. I'm not saying it can't be done, because I've definitely done that. But at the time when I was just gathering material and learning material, that was kind of the easiest or best way for me to find it at the time. And so it just eventually became that. Yeah.
So, Joe, was there a period at all where you were doing hippity hop rabbits or cups and balls or hot rod or, some of the more traditional?
Oh, sure. In fact, I would argue I still do a fair amount of fairly traditional magic in with my mentalism. Even though I'm known in my area as a mind reader, I still do a fair amount of quote unquote traditional magic that I can sell as mind reading or power of the mind or things like that. And there are also times where I'll do something totally different. Like I did a kids show for many years, and I eventually knew I had to just specialize. But I knew if I wanted to brand and develop a name for myself and develop the reputation, I knew I had to specialize. So I had to just start giving my kids show work to other people. So that's what I ended up doing. And I still look back on that kids show and I'm pretty happy with it. I had some really good routines. I had a routine where I dressed a kid up like Harry Potter, and we each did a silk routine where we tried to make our silks vanish, and mine vanished and his didn't. But then I pointed out that he made his or she made hers reappear inside theirs and pulled it out, or I'd pull it out of their sleeve. That was really fun. There was a SpongeBob routine in there, and I did restaurants for a long time where, I had some, I did SpongeBob's there. I did this is a funny story. I did a whole silk production routine because I didn't have any like livestock. So we just played music, and I had a screen that I'd made instead of buying a temple screen from Mac Magic. My dad and I made one out of duct tape because we had a book that showed how to make one. So I produced silks out of that, and then a mirror box we had made. And after one like big 4th of July show I did in my town where I gathered a group after the parade, my dad was like loading up the car while people were like talking to me afterwards. I'm like 13 or 14. I'm feeling like a local celebrity, And my dad's like, "Hey, Joe, hand me the mirror box." Very loudly in front of her. And I was like, Dad, you can't call it that. Like I'm thinking like, oh, you must protect. But now I'm like, oh, but yeah, of course. Like, how else is that strange box accomplished? I wonder. So that's definitely a big thing. But even now, like I'm working on a routine with the classic fast and loose endless chain, which isn't typically mentalism, but I'm working on it. And I do a lot. Like for example, I love card magic. That's the way I kind of justify it in my brain is I love all magic. Card magic is like my hobby and my passion, and mentalism is like more like the job. That's more like, okay, when people book me, I got that's the show, that's the work. That's what I like. I still play with it. I still get creative with it, but I very rarely will like throw the whole thing out and start over at like the big company party that's hired me. That's been honed over a long time. Again, I have lots of things I can change out or play with the timing or play with a different joke or a different reveal, but that show is pretty solid. It'd be a while and it'd take a lot for me to add more material to that unless I was doing a completely different show if I was booked the next year.
Got it. I want to invoke a name that comes up, I think, almost in every episode that we've done of this podcast. We're well into our 4th season. But I think this name probably has as much impact on you as he did on Jim, and that's Eugene Burger. What role did he play in sending you down the mental magic mentalist path?
Whenever I talk about Eugene and you both probably have the same kind of thing. On one level, it's like, oh, what can you say that hasn't already been said a million times about Eugene? And the, of course, easiest way is to go the personal route. Go, with the conversations you've had, with the personal impact he had. And I've been rereading some of his books and such, and it's great because I love reading his books because you can still hear his voice, like he's right here. He's just right here over your shoulder.
With that little chuckle.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, the naughty Santa Claus chuckle. Oh my God. But yeah, he showed me the very first time I sat down with him and he did some card magic, card mentalism for me. It was transformative. I mean, I remember I was at Abbott's and Arthur Trace, we were talking. I was young, I was maybe 16. I was figuring it out. My first magic convention. I was getting overwhelmed. And I kind of told him, I was like, I'm getting overwhelmed. Some people are starting to talk about the meaning and philosophy, and I don't know what to make of any of it. And he just goes, before you leave here, you should buy a Eugene Burger book. And I really lucked out. Even now to this day, I can't imagine how much I lucked out. I got one of his little pamphlets, Secrets and Mysteries of the Close-Up Entertainer, which eventually went into the Mastering Art, the Art of Magic hardbound. That book changed my life. It's a small little booklet, but it's like almost like he knocked out of the park right away with that's the first thing he ever wrote. That's the first thing he ever put out for magicians. And like just right out of the gate talking about keeping a notebook. I immediately started keeping a notebook. I still do his seance routine at the end of that book. I do it now with rather than revealing a card, I have it reveal a message the way he did it later in life. So yeah, just that one book, I was like, oh, I need to learn as much as I can about this guy. So I started saving up for the videos, and I had already seen him on TV doing card warp on the Art of Magic special with the Inquisition presentation. And I went to 12 years of Baptist school, so seeing this guy doing a trick, I mean, let's just face it, a very not anti-religious trick or religion trick, but a very critical of religious trick or religion trick. It was the first time I'd seen card warp too, and it blew my mind. So like I remember just seeing it and going like, what the hell's going on here? This guy's just literally warping reality while telling this incredible story. And then years later, getting to see him do it live. So then, yeah, years later, when I was 19, I got to meet him at Magic Chicago. And I told Eugene what impact he had on me. And he made a joke and he said, thank you, that's very kind. And I can't remember if it was that same night or another night. We went to dinner and I was starting to sit down and he was kind of at the other end of the table. He said, Joe, and just gestured to the seat next to him.
Nice.
And we sat down. I don't even know if we had ordered. And he just said, do you have a pack of cards with you? And we were off. He and I were the only two people in the entire world. But yeah, that was great. And then, yeah, we had lunch off and on over the years. And he helped me with some of my mentalism routines and really encouraged me to stick with it, even though I was so young, because that was the other real critique at the time when I was getting into it. It's like, oh, you're so young. And it's like, yeah, but that's going to get solved on its own with time. So just keep doing it. Like, so that was kind of his critique. Don't try to be anything other than you are right now. But my favorite Eugene story, he told me this over lunch. And I think to me, this is the Eugene story, because everyone talks about him as the bizarrest, the scholar, the guru on the hill. And everyone kind of, when talking about him, people really gloss over the fact that he was a successful North Shore Chicago close-up magician. And like, that's a big deal. That's a really big deal. Like, just from, like, he was commercially successful. He was commercially successful with less than 30 tricks for more than 30 years. Amongst, yes, magicians, but amongst like lay people, he had a career. So he told me a story. We were talking about intuition, and he told me a story of he had to do a bar mitzvah, and he said he wanted to get out of bar mitzvah, so he raised his prices. Well, this one, it didn't matter. So he took it because he's got to eat too. So already we're like, okay, he tried to get out of it by raising his price, and they said, okay, so Eugene Burger is doing a bar mitzvah. Okay. And on his way out the door, he had just gotten a shipment of hat tears in the mail. And however many it was, 60, 80, 100, however many it was, he didn't even open the package. He just took the whole thing, just on an intuitive whim, grabbed it, put it in his bag as he went out the door. Didn't think he'd need the whole thing, but just on an intuitive whim, it's like, I'm just going to take the whole thing. Just boom, just put it in. Gets to the gig, and they've also booked this kid's favorite band. Now, this is in Northbrook, Illinois, which is very wealthy. It's right in that same neighborhood where the Home Alone house is, where everyone says like, oh my God, what did Kevin McAllister's dad do to afford that house? And so now also the band Fall Out Boy is from that area. So in my head, this kid's a big Fall Out Boy fan, and it's Fall Out Boy either before or when they were famous and the parents could afford them. I don't know. But in my head canon, that's the kind of thing. So the big band playing, and Eugene's just like, oh my gosh, this band's playing. What am I going to do? So he's like, okay. He says to the parents, bring me the birthday kid first. I'll do a piece of magic directly for him. And in his head, he's like, oh, I'm going to do the hat tear silently for him first. Because the whole point of him doing the hat tear is people go around the party with these hats, with these magical hats, and the client can see that he's worked the party, and they're very happy with it. So they're, because that's the other thing. I tell people the story. They go, Eugene Burger did the hat tear? Yes, and it was a great routine. The script is in one of his books. It's awesome. And there's a total reasoning for it, which again, all these magical hats are all over the place. People are wearing them. They love them. It's great. Well, he brings the kid over. He has like one or two friends with him, tears up the tissue papers, makes the hat, puts it on the birthday kid's head. He says, thank you. The birthday kid walks away, and the kid's friend comes up to him and goes, oh, can I be next? So Eugene shrugs his shoulders, reaches in the bag again silently. He's not talking. He's working silently. Shows the tissue papers, tears them up. He's got like 3 different designs. So that one was like the pointed hat. This one's like a bonnet, puts it on. And now that kid gets out of the way, and now there's a line. So silently, for the entire party, Eugene Burger, Magic's Mystic Guru, is basically doing glorified paper hats, balloon animal style, for the whole party. And it's one of his most highest paying gigs ever. And they gave him a $500 cash tip.
There you go.
So yes, he knew how to write a beautiful script. He knew how to put meaning into things. He also had that worker's intuition to, I'm going to put these in the bag, and you know what? And I think he mentioned maybe once he like had a small crowd of them, and there was a slight break. Like he did like 1 or 2 silent pieces of magic, like again, maybe like the haunted pack or something. Because he had a few pieces he could do silently for just such occasions. But for the most part, that's all he did. And again, the clients were happy because there were 100 kids by the end of the party walking around with these magical hats that they got from the mysterious, cool Santa Claus looking guy over there. They were thrilled. They were thrilled. They didn't have to know that package was only $20. Like
That's thinking on your feet.
Absolutely.
So that's my personal favorite Eugene story, personally. So
I want to jump ahead a little bit by jumping
Sure.
back to something Jim and I discussed earlier this season. We replayed something that Rob Zabrecki said about dealing with audiences, particularly in the Houdini seance that he does at the Magic Castle, but dealing with audiences who come away from a mental magic or mentalism show thinking it's real and asking him to come to their house and help them contact a dead relative. How do you deal with this is or this isn't real?
It's an odd thing with mentalism, but I again, I don't think it's as strict to mentalism as we like to think it is. And I may be totally wrong on this, but I'm gonna plant my flag on this until I am objectively proven otherwise. But my that's why it's called a theory. But my magic theory on this is this applies to all magic. If you are doing any kind of magic and you're not getting weird questions like this occasionally, you're probably not that strong of a magician.
Interesting.
Las Vegas card magicians. I can't remember. I've had people say to me, "Oh yeah, this was Michael Skinner." I've had the same people say to me, "This was Jimmy Grippo." But there was a different story with Grippo, which I'll get to in a moment. So this could have been one or the other. But there was a story where this Las Vegas card magician would like once a week talk about how he'd get followed back to his room or his car from people saying, "Listen, I'm at my wit's end. Can you just help me win at like a couple tables just so I can help my family?" This guy doing card tricks.
Yeah.
You know, you can't get more basic, but he's one of the best in the world. Jimmy Grippo, he did some hypnosis, and there was a chance for him to hypnotize someone during a boxing match to feel no pain. And I know this because Marshall Brodeen, one of my mentors growing up, he did hypnosis, and he was brought in to show that you could still get injured and not feel the pain. And he had the full, they signed it away. He had the legalities to do this, but even he said he wasn't sure if this was still right in the long run. But he hypnotized a woman. They showed she couldn't feel any pain, and he took one of his fire-eating torches, held it under her arm, and she's like, "No, I felt no pain." "Yeah, you can keep going." And he kept going, and she ended up getting a 3rd-degree burn and didn't feel a thing. Now they took care of it. She didn't even scar. She was fine. But this showed like, hey, this boxer could get injured, a rib could poke into a lung or something. He could not feel it and die. Like, we need those things to know. And even Marshall said he wasn't sure if he should have even done that with the woman, but it could have saved someone's life in the long run. So he felt conflicted about that. I think other magicians, either it happens more tongue-in-cheek from people because they say like, I'd love to take you to the casino, or, "Oh, can you make my wife disappear?" I think that counts. I think that's still on the level of, because again, I still have people who ask those questions, and I would say most of the time they're not serious, but they're not joking either. Like, they're feeling it out. They're like, "Can you?" Those kinds of things, at least for me personally. I think if your magic is strong and you are a strong performer, it should happen. And if it's not, you're probably not, or your magic probably isn't. Again, I'm saying probably. I'm putting a lot of parentheses in here. There's a very strong argument that I know will probably tick a lot of people off. But again, I personally haven't seen it yet. I would love to see a performer who is very strong and very, does great magic, who has never had a story like this. But I personally haven't encountered one yet.
But what do you do, Joe, when at the end of one of your routines, one of the evenings, when someone comes up to you and clearly has been emotionally moved and is asking for more?
So I'm in a very interesting situation, which kind of mirrors our good friend Eli Marks in a kind of way.
Yeah.
So a couple of years ago, while at this arts park, I was doing a show called Mystic, and a woman, a psychic, whose brand and moniker was Mystic Chick, moved in. There was a brief moment of I was like, "Oh, you moving on my turf, and you're a psychic medium, and you're going to go by Mystic, and my show's Mystic, and people are going to guess, oh, I got you. And we immediately hit it off when we met in person. Immediately. She works as a psychic medium. She told me about her experiences and what she truly believes. She has a background in psychology and has worked in therapy. And we actually started doing events together. where I would do a mentalism show, and then she would do like a meditative, self-reflective seance afterwards. And what's been great about that team up is, so I open my shows by saying, oh, some call me a mentalist, some call me a mind reader. I'm not a medium. I'm a large, and I pat my belly. It's a borderline street joke, but it sums up my sense of humor. I have some other jokes around it. It's my wife's favorite joke, but it also it clarifies the rules, because I tell people all the time, like, oh no, if I'm backed into a corner saying, no, I work as a mind reader. I talk to ghosts, but I don't hear anything back. And the thing with Lauren is, because I used to tell people, like, yeah, you'd have to find someone else like that. Because if I tried to tell them, see a therapist or see this or see that, that's not what they wanted to hear. They're like, can you recommend someone? Well, when I met Lauren, who again has a background as a therapist, has a background as a psychologist, and if after a reading someone is like clearly unwell, she says to them, hey, I don't think you need another reading from me. I think you need help. This is what I'm feeling. You should go. Here's a list of some places and resources for you. Someone who's going to do the ethically right thing as a spiritual advisor, no different from a pastor, no different from a priest or anything like that in another religion. I was like, fine. Yes, I want to work with you. And we hit it off. She also has done haunted tours. So we've teamed up on that regard as well. And it's been great for that, because I know a little bit more of the history of some of the places we've been in. And she does more of like the actual, like, paranormal work. So if people have like the questions about like their relatives and stuff like that, they go talk to her. If they have a question about like, so when was the building built? They come talk to me. So it's been a great partnership to kind of share the load in a sense. And I get to just flat out tell people, hey, I'm an entertainer. If what you're talking about, here's who I'd recommend.
And so, Joey, are you ever pushed up against the wall by somebody? Hey, is this real? Are you really reading minds? And then what do you, in my experience, that will happen occasionally. Somebody will really push me to the point, because my philosophy is I don't want to pull the rug out from somebody who's had a great experience.
Sure.
If you enjoyed it, I don't want to take that away. But at the same time, I don't want to be in a place where somebody obviously needs some sort of help that I'm unwilling to and unable to provide. Do you then just go, hey, I'm an entertainer? At what point do you stop?
Oh yeah, sure. And I think, and I know a lot of performers don't love this, and I think it depends on the performer, the kind of audience you work with. Also, again, I'm working in historic buildings, historic theaters, places that attract people who are into this type of stuff. So the last thing you want to do is say, hey, you're an idiot for believing in something, or you're an idiot for having different beliefs than me. You don't want to do that. You definitely don't want to do that. The way I personally feel about it, as a general rule, 99 out of 100 times, is I say to them, no, I'm a mind reader. I use a variety of different, psychological, theatrical, and intuitive techniques. And, it doesn't work like just going up off the street. There's a process to it. I've built a show around that. And I do try to be as honest as possible about something when it is more on the trick spectrum. That makes sense. Like if I am going to do something more in like the seance realm, I'll say like, oh yeah, we're going to do something that recreates what they would have done in seances back in like the late 1800s, early 1900s. Well, all those seances were pretty much confirmed fraudulent. So I have the wiggle room to have words appear on a slate and not have to explain it. I'll usually say this has to do with the spirit in the building, or this is what I've learned, or this is how I've learned to do this with this particular pendulum or this particular bottle, those kinds of things.
You sort of headed off at the pass.
I head off at the pass, yeah. And then the other thing too that I'll say to people, if they're really pushing, I'll say, look, my job is to create mystery, not give answers. And the line I say is very often is believe whatever scares you the least, which is a fun line.
That is a fun line.
That really applies to life, doesn't it?
It really does.
Yes, because we do live in a world of alternative facts. We'll leave it there.
I thought you were going to say we live in a world of fear. I was going to, yeah, you got that right.
That too. So here's the perfect example. I did a show once where I did like a Q&A type audience mind reading routine, and I did spoon bending. Same performance, not the same show. This wasn't 2 dates. The one was on Thursday, one was on Friday. These were both the same show, Saturday night, 7 p.m. for the same company, blah, 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 whatever. Woman comes up to me and goes, okay, so I know the mind reading stuff, that's all like, probably like body language and you're reading people and maybe somehow figured out what some people were going to do. But like when you bend spoons, are you channeling? Is it chi? Are you, so, and she was just, that woman's asking about the spoon bending. As soon as she leaves, another person comes up to me and goes, okay, so the spoon bending, that's obviously like a trick. Maybe it's sleight of hand. Maybe they're trick spoons. I mean, yeah, they're keeping them, but I don't know, but there's got to be a trick to that. But when you're reading minds, are you like tuning into the person? Are you going inward? Same performance, same show. It is harder because in some places like corporate events, the theatrical framing isn't as clear. It's also different when you're going into a corporate event versus them coming into your world into a theater or into a haunted location or all those kinds of things. It's a different vibe. And I do feel like the rules are somewhat different in those cases. And then the final thing I'll say is I like to blur the line. And this is from Max Mathan, who talked extensively about this. I said, I don't know if you watch wrestling or not, but there's a term called kayfabe, which means the secret. So basically, I don't know if you've watched wrestling or not, and I'll kind of start a conversation with them about it, but I watched a little bit as a kid. And I'll say, there's people at 2 ends of the spectrum who I kind of feel are equally annoying. There's the first person who says, it's all real. That guy really hates that guy. He really broke his arm. He's really bleeding from the forehead. It's all that stuff. And then there's the person who yells, it's all fake. They've got a script. That's a blood capsule. He didn't really break his arm. But the vast majority of the swell in the middle goes, okay, I know they probably talked through some of like a loose script beforehand, but I don't think the human arm bends that way. And I don't think you can get a blood capsule to come out of the middle of the forehead. And the camera didn't cut when it did cut at the end though. Oh yeah. So maybe he could have snuck out. Okay. I mean, so some of this, yeah, probably exaggerated, but that guy really looks hurt. And I don't know where to put the marker. And that's very much what I'm trying to go for. Like, yes, this is a show. It's happening on command. It's happening on cue. But also, I'm really hoping there's some moments where you go, I don't know how to fully explain or put my finger on what's going on here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. So you do have to engage with people on that other level. I have noticed the more I engage people through story, through interaction, through world building, the more questions I get in that realm, whether just the is it real or isn't it question.
Yeah.
All right. I think everyone has had time to go get your playing cards. We want you to have 10 playing cards or 10 tarot cards or 10 cards where one of them has something on it that makes it different is what I'm guessing you need.
Yes. If you just have 10 index cards or business cards, I'll get a pen or pencil ready. Otherwise, you've got just 10 cards. That's fine. You can start mixing them up, and that'll give people who maybe still need to grab them, or maybe they grab them and put them in the other room, they can grab them. But this is a ritual based around awakening the magician in all of us, which is why I have the Magician Tarot card. Now, you don't have to see this, but I have the Magician Tarot card with me. One hand pointed towards the heaven, one hand pointed towards the earth. So we're going to do a ritual to awaken the magician in all of us. Now, at this point, is there anything I could know about the 10 cards in your or anybody's hands? Is there anything I can know about the cards in your hands?
I don't think so.
Nope.
There is one thing I know about everyone's cards. I know you have 10 of them. So I don't even want to know that. So in a moment, everyone's going to get rid of some. Now, don't get rid of just one. Get rid of at least 2. Make it a little harder. But at the same time, don't get rid of too many. You'll need at least like 4 cards left in your hand to work with. So this will still be impressive, but you don't have to tell me how many cards you're getting rid of. Just get rid of a few, set them off to the side, and hold the rest of the cards face down in your hand. And it looks like you both have done that. You can give them one more shuffle if you'd like. When you're done, you'll hold the cards face down in your hand, and you're going to pick them up and look at the bottom card and remember it. Now, if you're using index cards or business cards, this is where you take that pen or pencil and draw an X on that bottom card. So you'll know, you'll identify it later. If you want, you can take a photo of that card if you want to remember it for later on. But if you think you got it memorized, remember it and place the whole packet face down in your hand. And now we are going to start the ritual of the magician. We're going to cast a spell. We're going to spell the word magician. So take the top card of the pile in your hand, move it to the bottom, and say out loud the letter M.
Yeah.
M.
That's the first letter of the word magician. Take the new top card, move it to the bottom, and say A.
A.
Very good. Keep going with G.
G.
Next, I.
I.
Next is C.
C.
Next is another I.
Okay.
Next is another A. And finally, N.
N.
Very good. We have one more step to complete the ritual. You notice, as I mentioned before, the magician has one hand pointing towards the heaven, one hand pointed towards the earth. That's because he, she, or they are saying as above, so below. So take the top card, hold it above your head, and say as above.
As above.
Deal it to the table. Take the new top card, move it to the bottom of your pile, and your deepest mystical voice say so below.
So below.
Below.
Take the new top card, hold it above your head, say as above.
As above.
As above.
Deal it down. Take the new top card, move it to the bottom, and say so below.
So below.
Below.
Very good. Keep doing that until you're down to one card. Don't look at any of them. As above.
So below.
As
Above.
As above.
As below.
So below.
As above. And keep that last card in your hand. Don't look at it.
As above.
Very good. Hold that last card between your hands and say the most profound magic words you'll ever say. I learned this from Eugene Burger as well. These magic words are, I give myself permission to be powerful.
I give myself
Give
permission,
myself
to, be
permission
powerful.
to be powerful.
Take a look. You should now be holding your card in your hands.
Hey,
Woo,
that's
woo, woo.
awesome.
Fantastic.
And now you can keep that card as a reminder to go forth and accomplish the impossible in your life.
Well, that was impossible. What a trick.
How about that? That was just a delight from my perspective.
I hope everybody at home walked through it with us and had the same results. About halfway through it, I went, oh, I know this trick because I did a version of this for a Zoom book club. What I didn't realize that this book club was a wine club that called itself a book club, wherein by the time they got to me on Zoom, boy, you know, Robert Shaw and Richard Dreyfuss and Jaws, where they've been drinking quite a bit.
Yes.
Yes, that's kind of where they're at. And they had a great deal of fun following the directions for the card trick, and it did not work.
They don't remember that.
No. And the beauty of it was such a good lesson for me because, like, oh, okay, that didn't work. Let me try this. And boom, I go right into Wave and it's fine. And I suppose if they look back on it as a memory, if they remember that evening at all, they will remember, oh, yeah, I did a fun card trick. They're not going to remember the one that didn't work. They're just not going to.
No, that's exactly right. At least that's the way I want to live my life and the way I want to believe.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
If listeners want to share the trick, there's a video of us taking part in that trick. We pulled that out of the interview and put it up as a video. Find a link in the show notes on our YouTube channel for that. There's so much else that he's talking about. The one that really jumped out at me was the Eugene Burger story, a story I'd never heard before.
Me either.
Talk about the quintessential showman who knows how to make the most out of the situation you've been handed. I mean, a lot of performers would have left in a huff or a minute and a huff, but he just looked at what was there and what he had and he made magic.
Yeah. And not easy to do, because I would have just fought tooth and nail to do what I came to do and been wildly unsuccessful. But Eugene,
Being Eugene,
being a magic mystic guru, had the ability to pivot, which not all performers, not even all good performers,
yeah.
can pivot when they need to. And Eugene certainly was one of those who could pivot at a moment's notice.
Well, as I think Joe said, he knew how to write a beautiful script. He knew how to put meaning into things, and he also had that worker's intuition. And those years of restaurant work and dealing with group after group after group really taught him how to deal with any situation.
Yeah, but he was and remains one of my heroes, not just magical heroes,
Yeah.
just heroes. He was just a good guy, really wonderful human being. And that's why he's the patron saint of this podcast.
He is indeed. Well, thank you to Joe Diamond for letting us finally get you on the podcast after all this time. Thank you for not pounding a nail into your head like you did the first time I saw you. I never need to see that again.
That's a gift right there. That I don't want to. I don't want to know if it's a trick. I don't want to see it again.
Why would? Oh boy. Anyway, thank you so much, Joe. We love talking to you. And speaking of things that we love, it's time for the I Love That segment, where we each recommend something to our audience and to each other that we might love. So I believe you go first.
This is an easy one for me because I just watched it and I was so blown away by it. I've been a fan of John Mulaney and his comedy for years. I think I came to him, as most people came to him, through a horse in a hospital bit that he did that became so popular during COVID.
It's like there's a horse loose in a hospital. It's like there's a horse loose in a hospital. I think eventually everything's gonna be okay, but I have no idea what's gonna happen next. And neither do any of you, and neither do your parents, because there's a horse loose in the hospital. It's never happened before. No one knows what the horse is gonna do next, least of all the horse. He's never been in a hospital before. He's as confused as you are.
But he's got a new special. I think most people know that he had some addiction issues and went into treatment. And this special is all about that. It's called Baby J, and it is funny. It is scary. It is revelatory. I can't recommend it highly enough. So if I had to pick one thing for this segment that I love, it's Baby J by John Mulaney. It's available wherever you watch things that stream.
I will second that emotion and also say that while that is a great stand-up special, all of his specials are great.
Oh, yeah.
Baby J is particularly emotional, but he is a unique voice in stand-up comedy. I would recommend any of his specials. I'd also recommend any of the times that he guest hosted on Saturday Night Live, because he had been a writer there for years, and he took the opportunity when he was a guest host to pull from the files scripts that he had loved. He might have been involved in the writing of them. He might not have been. Pulled them and said, let's do these because I think they're funny. And he brought some great scripts that maybe hadn't gotten the appreciation they deserve. He also wrote all the Stefan stuff for Bill Hader when Bill Hader would play the Stefan character on Saturday Night Live.
And if you don't know, he would write it, Bill Hader would rehearse it, and right before the show would air, he would rewrite all the cards with completely new, different jokes that Bill Hader had no idea what was coming. And that's why you see Bill Hader
covering his face with his hands as he laughs.
And laughing, because they were making him laugh as well as us.
It's a human Roomba. It's that thing of when you put a midget on a skateboard. So you put a midget on a skateboard and it slides around on your floor eating garbage.
Anyway, John Mulaney, great choice for this episodes. I love that. I'm gonna go in a different direction.
Okay.
To something that came out as we're recording now 50 years ago, and you and I talked about this briefly on a a rare road trip that we took a while back. And it's a movie called Phantom of the Paradise, which was made
Oh,
in
yeah.
1974. It's a rock musical comedy horror film. It was independently produced but released by 20th Century Fox the same year they released Rocky Horror Picture Show. And both films failed. And then somehow somebody somewhere started running Rocky Horror at midnight, and that became the thing to go do. That didn't happen with Phantom of the Paradise, although it had long life in Winnipeg, primarily because the theater owner there knew how to advertise it and got people to come and see it. And he used sort of his own advertising techniques to do that. But it's, like I say, it's a rock musical. It stars Paul Williams. Yes, Paul Williams
Wow.
as the bad guy, Swan. And it is an amalgamation of the Faust legend and Phantom of the Opera. And it's got references to Psycho. It's even got a flat out parody of the opening of Orson Welles's Touch of Evil. In the story, Paul Williams is an impresario who steals the music of one Winslow Leach, played by the great William Finley, has him sent to prison. He escapes from prison, tries to destroy the records of the music, of his music that Paul Williams has stolen, and he is supposedly killed when he falls into a record press and then throws himself into the river. But he survives as the Phantom, and he haunts Paul Williams' new rock palace called the Paradise, where he starts killing people off in order to get his music back.
20th Century Fox presents Phantom of the Paradise, a gothic horror story.
What was that?
A beautiful love story.
Like a circus.
A cinematic odyssey through the rock universe. From Greece to glitter and beyond. The story of a sound, the man who created it, the girl who sang it, the monster who stole it, and the phantom who haunts the paradise, the ultimate rock palace.
It also stars Jessica Harper in her first film role. Those of you who are on the Jessica Harper bandwagon know that in the mid 70s to early 80s, Jessica Harper made a lot of great movies. She was in My Favorite Year. She's in Love and Death briefly. She's in Phantom of the Paradise. She was in the sequel to Rocky Horror Picture Show called
There
Shock
was a
Treatment.
sequel?
There's a sequel to Rocky Horror called Shock Treatment, which picks up with Brad and Janet a few years later after they've been married. If we ever do a segment on terrible movies with great soundtracks, it would top my list, because Richard O'Brien, who wrote all the music and lyrics for Rocky Horror, did the same thing for Shock Treatment, and the songs are great. The movie's not great. Anyway, so it's the 50th anniversary of Phantom of the Paradise. You can find it on streaming services. It is a delight. It is funny. It is quirky. Brian De Palma made this before his big success with Carrie, and so it has a lot of his very quirky point of view that he had in his earlier films that came out, like Hi Mom and Greetings, his early, really, really independent films. But it's a glossy musical with great songs that parody Kiss and Sha Na Na and a couple classic songs. And it's 50 years old, so it's worth seeing. It's called Phantom of the Paradise. I would look it up.
I will look it up. And may it be said of all of us that we have a long life in Winnipeg.
Yes, if that's the worst that happens to you, I suppose that's pretty good.
I now have two lines. I'd like a long life in Winnipeg, and I'm going to believe what scares me the least.
All right, enough of this lighthearted shilly-shally. We got to get down to reading chapter, where are we? Chapter 15.
Before we do,
Yeah.
please kind of give us a thumbnail of chapter 14, and
Oh,
then
yeah.
I'll dive in.
So in chapter 14, let's see, Eli ran into Tracy in the theater lobby. He saw Megan. Eli picks up all the signed books by Clifford Thomas. And then there's an encounter between the projectionist, the dead projectionist, Tyler, his ex-wife, and her boyfriend. In the lobby, there's an argument about who owns Tyler's effects. And Tracy scares them off with a baseball bat. And that takes us right into chapter 15.
Chapter 15. Despite the short debacle over who in fact held the number one position on my speed dial, the rest of my evening with Megan was surprisingly pleasant, with no bursts of jealousy on my part that had marred our other recent encounters. It helped that Quentin's name never came up. The only interruption during the evening was the quick phone call I made to Deirdre to report our near-violent encounter at the movie theater. The call confirmed Mrs. Tyler James' assertion that the police had denied her access to Tyler's apartment, and I also learned that they had rejected her request to claim his body from the morgue. Deirdre, being surprisingly chatty, went on to explain that Minnesota doesn't recognize common law marriages, which put Mrs. James' dubious claims on even weaker footing. After scrounging through Megan's remarkably sparse refrigerator and larder, I cobbled together a decent spaghetti sauce, pasta, and salad. Both were exponentially improved by a bottle and a half of red wine. I noted that Megan's wine rack was clearly not suffering from the same lack of attention she paid to the pantry. "You certainly were brave tonight," Megan said out of the blue during a short lull in the conversation while I opened the second bottle of wine. "I mean, facing down those two creeps. And you didn't even know Tracy had gone to get a baseball bat, did you?" I shook my head, smiled smugly as one does when one has demonstrated meritorious bravery. "What choice did I have, really?" I said, refilling her glass and topping off mine. I considered shirking, but how would that look? I mean, come on. I'm no shirker. "You don't shirk," Megan agreed. "And as a basketball player, Tracy has a lot more experience in scuffles and such. I couldn't be shown up by a mere girl." "At over 6 feet, there's nothing mere about that girl," Megan said as she sipped. "Hey, did I mention how horrible customers were today?" "You might have said something in passing," I said as I slid back into my chair. "But I never get tired of hearing about horrible New Age customers and their petty, self-righteous, but environmentally friendly needs." That was all the push she needed. I sat back, sipped my wine, and smiled as she recounted multiple examples of their innate horribleness. The next morning, I knocked lightly on Harry's door on the way up to my apartment in order to join him in our daily breakfast ritual. However, when he didn't appear after repeated knocking, I hit the number 1 on my speed dial, making a mental note to move Megan to that slot as soon as possible. Harry answered on the 3rd ring, and the tiredness in his voice gave me my answer before I even raised the question. "Thanks, Eli," he said quietly, "but I'm beat. I think I'm going to sleep in for another hour. Are you okay to get breakfast on your own?" I assured him I was. I started to head up to my apartment, but on the spur of the moment, I decided to head over to the coffee shop on the other side of 48th Street. A change of locale for breakfast would do me good, I decided, and since I was already bundled up for the cold, it felt like the notion had been almost predestined. 5 minutes later, I was sipping coffee and biting into a warm, flaky croissant with a chocolate center. I flipped open my iPad and was deeply engrossed in an article in Genie magazine about the pros and cons of the Erdnase bottom deal when my cell phone buzzed. I noted it was 9:01 and then answered the phone. "You're at work early." "The early bird has got nothing on me," said the far too chipper voice of my agent, Elaine. "I'm calling with a last-minute gig for tonight. You interested? Available?" I was both, but my primary reaction was one of tempered wariness. I hadn't heard from the elusive Mr. Lime in several days, and this sort of last-minute gig scenario was his favorite gambit as a setup for his patented creepy one-on-one meetings. "Probably," I said non-committally. "Is this a client you've worked with in the past, or is this a one-off?" "Oh, this is a meeting planner I've known for years. A bit flighty, not great with details, a bit of a lush, and a complete clothes horse, but a real sweetheart," she said in what could have been a perfect self-assessment if she had been so inclined. "Seems she got the call at 0:30 this morning from up on high that the one thing missing for her client's event tonight was some walk-around close-up magic. She called me, I called you, and here we are." Here we were indeed, I thought. With the client properly vetted, I quickly decided to accept the offer as my evening was open and, still stinging from Harry's recent criticism, I could always use the chance to polish my act to a level close to that of the almighty Quentin Moon. "Sure," I said. "Text me the details and I'll make you proud." "You always do. Now I've got to deal with the fallout from a recalcitrant and possibly inebriated piano player who got mad at a gig last night and played Piano Man for 2 hours straight," she said with a laugh. "What was his excuse?" "He claimed once you get into that song, there's no way out," she explained with another laugh. "To be honest, he might have a point." "We lead weird lives," I said. "We do indeed," she replied, still laughing as the phone clicked. "You know what Hunter S. Thompson said to do when things get weird?" The voice behind me was familiar, and though I couldn't identify him on a conscious level, my unconscious reacted with a chill which ran the length and breadth of my body. I turned and looked up to see Mr. Lime. He gestured to the empty chair across from me, and I nodded more out of habit than agreement. I had never seen him ambulatory and was surprised at how tiny he actually was, noting he wasn't much taller standing than I was in a sitting position. He moved like a marionette being operated by a drunken puppeteer, as if each joint was being operated separately and badly. I'd also never seen him in the sunlight, and the early morning glow bouncing off the snow outside made his skin look even more translucent, not unlike the visible man model we used in biology class in high school. Recognizing correctly that I was at a loss for words, he continued his explanation as he lowered himself into his seat. "Mr. Thompson opined, when the going gets weird, the weird turn pro. It's an odd expression, but once you hear it, you'll be surprised at the number of applications to which it applies on a day-to-day basis." I felt my brow began to furrow as I worked on forming a question, but he waved it away with his bony hand, which looked so thin I suspect it didn't even move the air as he passed it in front of me. "Not to worry, Mr. Marks, I'm not following you. On the contrary, I was on my way to see you this morning. Harpo," he continued, gesturing toward the counter, "stopped into this lovely establishment to purchase some tea to help me stave off the chill, and came back to the car with the happy news that you were already comfortably ensconced within." I looked over at the queue which had formed at the counter and recognized Mr. Lime's silent henchman, patiently waiting in line, just like anyone off the street. He saw I was looking at him and gave me a subtle tip of his non-existent hat. I turned back to Mr. Lime, who now, for the fourth time in my life, was seated across from me, smiling his skull-like grin from ear to ear. Seeing him there, right out here in public, was wildly disconcerting, like seeing a mermaid sitting poolside at the YMCA, if that mermaid were a scary old psychopath. "You were coming to the store?" I said. Saying the words aloud provided a chill all their own. To the magic store?" "Yes. I've never seen your establishment and figured by this time you've most likely had the chance to interview the 4 suspects I had suggested to the police. I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts and am, admittedly, impatient by nature." Again he smiled, and again it was all I could do to keep from jumping up and running out of the coffee shop, screaming into the snowy morning. It took effort, but I was able to suppress the desire, but at the same time, I made a mental note that it would always provide a good hip pocket option. "Did you have a chance to meet with them?" He leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table, and then intertwined his bony fingers and settled his chin upon them. The look would have been coquettish if he were a 17-year-old high school cheerleader, but the sheer ingenuousness of his pose simply made it all the more dark and frightening. "Did they prove thought-provoking?" The question was presented innocently enough, but it was backed by such menace that for a moment I had a sudden fear for each of my interview subjects, sensing one or more could be in some sort of homicidal peril. "Each was thought-provoking in his or her own way," I began, not at all sure where I was headed. I haven't spent much time in the past with extremely wealthy people. Lime clucked his tongue and nodded. Yes, money does. He paused, thinking for a long moment. It does funny things to people, he finally said, putting a spin on funny, which made it sound anything but. It looked like he had more to say on the topic, but Harpo arrived at this moment, bearing a cardboard cup of tea, which he placed gingerly in front of Mr. Lime. The old man removed his elbows from the table and leaned back as Harpo reached past me for the sweetener options. He found 2 packets of actual sugar and opened them daintily to ensure, I suspected, that no errant crystals found their way to the front of Mr. Lime's well-tailored black overcoat. With the sugar safely deposited in the cup, Harpo produced a stir stick and gave the liquid what appeared to be the standard and regulated number of stirs. He tapped the wet stick on the side of the cup and then stepped away as silently as he had arrived. Mr. Lime reached for the cup with both hands, looking up at me as he did. "Excuse me," he said, "but I have a bit of a chill." "Me too," I agreed, and we each raised our respective cups to our lips. He gurgled softly while sipping his tea. For my part, I couldn't take my eyes off his hands. They were clasped tightly around the cardboard cup, and I swear I could actually see the coffee shop logo through his rice paper skin. He swallowed happily, set the cup down, and licked his lips, his tongue darting in and out of his mouth like it was afraid of the sunlight. He smiled up at me and gestured with both hands. "Proceed," he said. "I'm very anxious to hear about your adventures." Mr. Lime was remarkably quiet through my recap, nodding encouragingly and offering an occasional "ah" or "oh yes, I see," but otherwise letting me recount the substance of the interviews and my alleged perceptions at my own halting pace. I wrapped up my report, and he looked at me for a long time without expression. Then suddenly, like a dead flower resurrecting back to life, his lips twisted into a smile which quickly spread across his lean and sallow face. "Excellent," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Simply excellent," he added, then picked up his tea and took a short sip. "Thank you," I said from habit. I honestly wasn't sure which part or parts of my story were deserving of this praise. "Let me ask you this," he said, setting down his cup and reaching for a paper napkin from the dispenser. It proved to be recalcitrant, and so I pulled one out from the other side of the dispenser just as Harpo appeared at the table. In his stubby, muscular hands, he held a small pile of napkins, which he had produced seemingly out of thin air. Presented with these choices, Mr. Lime looked from one offering to the other and then took the napkin I was holding. Before he left, Harpo turned and gave me a blank look, which I naturally read as cold and homicidal. "Let me ask you this," Mr. Lime repeated, once he had dabbed away the small amount of moisture from his lips. "And I'd like you to be completely honest." "Certainly," I said. "What does your gut tell you about each of these people and their relationship to the murder of Tyler James and the theft of London after midnight?" "I don't know about the murder," I began, "but each of them could, I think, have been the buyer of the stolen movie print." "Expound," he said, once again resting his elbows on the table and his chin on his hands. I sat back, considering the 4 suspects. Okay. Obviously, each of them has enough money to make the purchase, which might have been as high as $750,000 if the $75,000 found in the projection booth was just a 10% down payment. "Agreed," he said with a sharp nod. "However, let us not forget that, on occasion, people take deep, sometimes homicidal pleasure from getting what they've paid for without actually paying for it. to spend the money, but still have the money, as it were. The miser's dream, I said. Exactly, he said, his smile getting even wider. And speaking as a miser myself, he continued, that dream never dies. I wasn't quite sure what to do with this comment, so I turned my attention back to his original question. Clifford Thomas, I began, likes kitschy, macabre things, if his Addams Family house on Summit Avenue is any indication. He writes murder mysteries, and the plot of London After Midnight is, to some degree, a famous murder mystery. He admitted to buying items from Tyler in the past, and spending money like that in what some might consider a foolish manner could be his way at getting back at his more successful ex-wife, I added. If you don't mind a little dime store psychoanalysis. Not only do I not mind it, I encourage it, Mr. Lime said. And what of our banker friend, the art collector, Mr. Kavanaugh? He takes great pleasure, perverse pleasure, really, in possessing things he's not supposed to, I said, remembering his white-walled apartment in downtown St. Paul and the treasures hidden behind them. Makes him feel like a bad boy. And I think owning something stolen by the Nazis and hidden by the Swiss, a one-of-a-kind treasure, which everyone thought was long lost, would be right up his alley. An odd bird, that one, Mr. Lime said quietly, clearly not recognizing the irony of one odd bird calling out another. He looked back at me. Think he is our secret buyer? I had already given this considerable thought, going back and forth on my opinion of his alleged guilt. I shook my head. I don't think so, I said. Why not? It's what he said. Chip Kavanaugh likes to look at his stolen treasures, hang them on the walls, and hide them from the world for his own private viewing. I really don't think some old tin movie reels filled with disintegrating celluloid is the sort of thing he'd get excited about, let alone kill for. Good point. And what of the Ice Queen, Ms. Sherry Lisbon? Was she our mystery buyer? I took a sip of my now cold coffee as I thought back on our meeting in her office at Bimax. She's a tough one to read, I said. Indeed. She doesn't strike me as a passionate movie memorabilia buyer, I continued. In fact, I can't decide what her category would be, if any. She doesn't care what she's buying, as long as she's able to take it away from someone else who wants to buy it. What does your dime store psychoanalysis suggest to you about her? That she's a nut job, I said before I realized I was saying it out loud. Mr. Lime chuckled at my assessment. Yes, I think you've hit the nail squarely on the head with our friend Miss Lisbon. But they're all nut jobs, really, I said. I don't know if they were nut jobs before they got rich or if the money was the cause, but each of them struck me as strange in their own unique, creepy, and oddball way. I can say this about that. I started out dirt poor, and money hasn't changed me in the least. He stared at me straight-faced for a long moment, and then his face erupted into a huge smile. Gotcha, didn't I? I had to admit he had. I could tell he was deeply pleased at his momentary ruse. And what of Randall Glendower? He asked, getting back on topic. Where does he fall on this spectrum? I couldn't help but smile, thinking of the cheery, rotund comic book store owner with his pet monkey, million-dollar website, and fanatics' love of movies and movie memorabilia. He's the only one who admitted to bidding on buying London After Midnight, and he was outbid. Did he say by who? I shook my head. I'm not even sure he knew. Yet one of our quartet has admitted to taking pleasure in outbidding people on the objects they love, just for the sheer enjoyment of taking it away from them. I considered this. Sherry Lisbon certainly could be the one who outbid him, I said. But if she was the one who bought the movie from Tyler, She would hardly need to kill him to take possession of it. Yes. Well, that brings us to the other side of our coin, Mr. Lime said, sitting back in his chair. As you say, whoever bought the movie from Tyler would have no need to kill him for it. So we can assume, at least for argument's sake, our killer was not the final buyer. And yet, to date, no one admits to being the buyer, or for that matter, the seller, which brings us back to square one. He sighed deeply, to such a degree that his shrunken chest appeared to sink even further into his tiny frame. Then his eyes once again brightened, and he clapped his hands together with such force that several other patrons in the quiet coffee shop noticeably started at the sound. Enough of this, he said, as his skeleton grin returned to his face. Do me a trick, and we'll call it a day. I was still reeling from the sound of his hands clapping, and it took me a moment to register what he was requesting. As soon as I did, I realized he had once again caught me unarmed, magic-wise. I recognized we were a short walk from a store, which was packed, wall to wall, with magic tricks and classic illusions, but I wanted to leave that as a last resort. I had the feeling once Mr. Lime was invited into your home, like a vampire, things would progress quickly from bad to worse. I scanned the room and then our table for inspiration, my gaze settling on the small container of various sweeteners that Harpo had selected from earlier. In an effort to meet Harry's recent challenge to give my current act some well-needed practice while adding to my admittedly limited repertoire, I had been reading up on possible tricks I could quickly slip into my close-up act. There was one with a sugar pack called Very Sweet by an inventive magician named David Gabay, which I had recently read about but had never attempted. As foolish as it was to try out a new trick without any practice, I recognized if I didn't do something, I was likely to raise Mr. Lime's ire, and I certainly didn't want to experience what that might be like. I pulled the sweetener container over, praying Harpo hadn't taken the last of the real sugar packets when he had sweetened Mr. Lime's tea. As luck would have it, there was one more remaining, stuck in amid the pink and yellow packets of artificial options. Like the miser's dream, I began, vamping like crazy while I ran the steps of the illusion through my mind. Everybody likes the idea of spending their money while still keeping it. It's basic human nature. Mr. Lime nodded in silent agreement as I held up the sugar packet. Now, let's say you want this sugar packet, and it costs $0.25, and all you have is $0.25, and you'd rather not give up your last quarter, but what are you going to do? Because you really want the sugar. I was nearly out of breath as my run-on sentence finally found some desperately needed punctuation. Do you have $0.25? I continued. Mr. Lime stared back at me as if I had suddenly begun speaking Mandarin. I repeated the question in a shorter form. $0.25. Oh, dear, he said, looking for the first time since I'd met him, perplexed and perhaps even a little lost. I don't carry money. Haven't in years. $0.25, you say? He began to pat his pockets, but we both knew how that was going to end. To take him out of his misery, I quickly produced a coin from my pocket. Not a problem, I said with a hollow laugh. You can use mine. I slid the coin across the table toward him. He picked it up and examined it with great interest, like an archaeologist who had discovered a relic from a lost civilization. While he scrutinized both sides of the rare treasure I'd given him, I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out my ever-present black Sharpie pen. I uncapped it and held it out for him. To make sure I don't switch the coin in the process of the trick, why don't you go ahead and put your initials on the coin? Once again, he gave me a blank, pained look. Sign the coin, he said in a whisper. Just your initials, I said, again pushing the pen toward him. Sorry to disappoint you, Mr. Marks, he said, regaining his voice, but I don't sign things. Anything. Ever. While I've certainly had audience members who were too drunk to sign their initials, this was a first for me. I glanced over at Harpo, who was seated straight back in a chair by the window, his hands folded neatly in his lap. He was staring at us, unblinkingly. I had the feeling he had been doing this the entire time. "And I'm guessing your pal Harpo doesn't go around signing things either," I said, trying to put a jovial spin on my tone. Mr. Lime smiled ruefully as he gave his head a simple shake. "How about I put my initials on it?" I suggested, pulling back both the pen and the coin and trying to jumpstart the trick back to life. I mean, if the magician puts his own initials on the coin, that does weaken the credibility of the trick somewhat, but we're all friends here, right? This last thought made Mr. Lime widen his smile, showing off his pointed and yellowed teeth. "Friends, that we are, Mr. Marks, that we are." I fought the chill this statement sent throughout my body by refocusing my attention on the coin, the pen, and my somewhat shaky initials. Then I capped the pen and picked up the coin. "In order to obtain the sugar," I said, using the coin to gesture toward the packet on the table, "we're forced to give up the coin." With that, I tossed the coin from one hand to the other and then opened the hand to show the coin was gone. I opened the other hand as well, which appeared to be equally empty. This produced a delighted coo from Mr. Lime. I didn't take any time to bask in it, but charged forward. "We may have lost the coin, but we now possess the sugar," I said, picking the packet up from its place on the table. "But wouldn't it be a wonderful world if we could have both the sugar and—" I tore the top off the packet and handed it to Mr. Lime. He took it gingerly with 2 fingers and, noting my gesture, turned the packet upside down. A flow of white crystals streamed out onto the tabletop, along with the resounding clink of the quarter. "And the coin," Mr. Lime said, completing my sentence. His bony finger separated the grains of sugar on the table, revealing the signed coin within. He gently picked it up and looked closely at the initials, a look of wonder on his face. "If you'd like," I said, brushing the pile of sugar into my hand, "you can keep the quarter as a souvenir." "Oh, that would be wonderful," he said, not taking his eyes off the sticky, pen-stained coin. "Just wonderful." I will say this about the odd Mr. Lime. He was undoubtedly a criminal. He was likely a murderer, perhaps on multiple occasions. But when things went right, he was also the best audience I'd ever had for magic. I followed Mr. Lime and Harpo out to their car. It was parked boldly in a no-parking zone, yet bore no sign of a ticket. The old man clutched Harpo's arm as they navigated to the car's back door. I found myself extending an arm of my own to ensure the fragile marionette made it into the back seat unscathed. Once safely deposited, he looked up at me, squinting in the sunlight reflecting off the snow. As always, his pupils were deep black, even as his eyes narrowed in the bright light. "Thank you, Mr. Marks, for your insights," he said. "And of course, for your magic. I'm afraid I've grown tired. We'll save our visit to your shop for another day." "Looking forward to it," I lied. "And you, take care of yourself," he continued, as Harpo stood by patiently with one hand on the door handle, waiting to close the door and get on their way. "After your close call with the stolen car the other night, I would hate to lose you to a simple hit-and-run accident." "You and me both." "Yes," he agreed with an enigmatic smile. "Any other accidents I should know about?" I was about to say no, but a thought occurred to me. Actually, there was another accident. He looked up at me with great interest, so I continued. "Tracy, the manager of the movie theater, fell off a ladder in front of the theater. Someone pushed it. No one saw who it was. And was this Tracy injured? She cracked her head pretty badly, but she's okay, I said, remembering the frozen pool of blood on the sidewalk in front of the theater. That raises many questions for our consideration, but one in particular, he said, leaning back and settling into the leather seat. What do you and this Tracy have in common? I thought the question sounded rhetorical, and Harpo must have agreed, for he shut the door to the dark sedan, and the car disappeared down 48th Street. But I didn't really notice, because I was considering what Tracy and I had in common. I had considered it before and had no trouble bringing it back to the surface. It was this. We had both looked into the projection booth and witnessed the details, such as they were, of the Tyler James crime scene.
All right.
Okay.
Okay, so I know you love Easter eggs.
I do.
And this is, we planted an Easter egg in this chapter years and years ago when it was one of your Mr. Lime scenes, and Eli did the sugar packet trick for Mr. Lime. That quarter that Mr. Lime doesn't have any money, and then when Eli produces the quarter, refuses to sign it, that quarter will turn up again in a significant way in book number 8, the self-working trick in the short story, The 38 Steps. So it seems like a throwaway here, but it was something I knew I would use later. And it took, I don't know, what, 4 more books to get to it, but that quarter finally pays off.
I like that. That's a shaggy dog quarter. That's what that is.
That's exactly it. Anyway, that kind of wraps it up for episode 415. Next time, we're going to listen to chapter 16, and we're going to revisit just an important little story from John Lovick that when he was on the show a couple years ago, he explained the birth of Handsome Jack, and it's such a good educational story that I thought it was worth just listening to that again. So
I agree.
we will go to that. We'll listen to John Lovick, and we'll listen to chapter 16, and we'll also have a couple more I Love It's from the two of us. Until then, hang in there. A big hello to everybody in Winnipeg.
For all of you, both of you, I should say, both of you listening in Winnipeg, it's a pleasure to formally meet you, or informally, or we're just happy that something is happening for us in Winnipeg.
And if Walter, the technical director, is listening, it's good to see you again, Walt. Take care, everybody.
Talk to you later.
Bye-bye.
This has been Behind the Page, the Eli Marks podcast, with your hosts, John Gaspard and Jim Cunningham. Produced by Alberts Bridge Books at Grass Lake Studios. Find this podcast and all the books in the Eli Marks series at elimarksmysteries.com. That's ELIMARKS Mysteries.com. And thanks for listening.